we had some success because he tried to fight Michael Jordan every time. And every game he tried to fight Michael. So if Vernon said, I'm going to hit you, he would hit you the next play. Vernon says, I'm going to trip you in the air, he would trip you in the air the next. He delivered on his messages.
Through the good and the bad, there would be no Clutch City without him. He was one of the most unpredictable players in NBA history, in both his play and his emotions. But through it all, he was 100% authentic. And while Vernon Maxwell is spoken of more for all of the blow-ups throughout his career, it gets overshadowed that he was a dangerous player when he was on. He was fast and quick, with a good handle and passing vision, while still being able to slash to the hoop and finish, making him the perfect combo guard. And while his shot didn't fall as much as he wanted it to, he was a player who could create his own shot. And when it was falling, you were in trouble. And no matter what, you couldn't leave him open from beyond the arc. And on defense during his years with the Rockets, he could get uptight on his matchup and play his physical brand of defense to wear out his opponent, knowing that he had Hakeem Olajuwon behind him to clean up whenever someone got past, yet could also sag off and use his timing and instincts to jump the passing lanes. But consistency was one of the only things that kept Vernon Maxwell from being great, as he could look like a superstar against top competition one night, then fade away against a lesser opponent the next. And while he was a guy that tried to get other players to lose their temper, he had a lot of trouble controlling his own. But you knew he was going to leave it all out on the court for you. And he's the perfect example of a player you hated playing against, but loved having on your team. Let's jog your memory. A Gainesville native, Vernon Maxwell got a feel for the game as a youth by dribbling a basketball up and down the street in the middle of the night. And it paid off, as he would go on to star at local Buckholz High as a two-sport athlete, excelling in both football and basketball. But he was most recognized for his on-court performance, leading to him being named Florida's Mr. Basketball as a senior in 1984. And while he had many schools vying for his services, after he took his visit to NC State, he realized anything outside of Gainesville would be too far. So he committed to play for Norm Sloan and the Florida Gators. Florida had yet to make an NCAA tournament appearance in the school's history, but they were a team on the rise, with Maxwell and sophomore guard Andrew Moten. And although Maxwell would be a starter for only half the season, he still finished top 3 on the team in scoring and steals. But while Florida's offense improved, their defense regressed, and they finished with an 18-12 record and missed the tournament, with Maxwell's freshman year seeing him average about 13.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. Maxwell was a full-time starter as a sophomore, and with more playing time came increased numbers, as Maxwell would lead the team in scoring, tie for the team lead in assists, and at just 6'4", would finish second in rebounding, and would even be a top 5 scorer in the conference, as he would be named second team All-SEC. And with great play from Moten and another junior in Joe Lawrence, the Gators were making positive strides. The 86 Gators relied more on their defense than in 85, and started the season at 8-3, but then lost 3 straight. They would snap the streak with their biggest win of the year over a 14th-ranked LSU team, but remained up and down the rest of the way, as they finished the regular season at 16-11, then would lose to LSU in the quarterfinals of the conference tourney. However, they would get an NIT invite for the 3rd consecutive season, but would go on a bit of a run this time, as they made it all the way to the semifinals before losing to Wyoming by 1 point. Then they would lose the 3rd-place game to Louisiana Tech, as Maxwell's sophomore season had seen him average about 19.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. But 1987 would be a historic year for Florida Gators basketball, and Maxwell had his fingerprints all over it. The M&M duo of Maxwell and Moten was in full effect this season, with Maxwell being named first-team All-Conference, and Moten receiving a second-team selection. And they welcomed a big man who made the SEC All-Freshman team in Dwayne Shinsis. Maxwell put up career highs in scoring and steals to lead the team, and would finish second in the conference in both categories, as overall, Florida would be the nation's 18th highest scoring team, yet they would lose to Florida State to kick off their season. But after that, they would win 8 straight, before losing a close one to Cal. They wouldn't be able to get as hot as they were to begin the year after that, but still played a great season, and would go an impressive 12-6 in conference play, which included a big win over number 9 Alabama on January 28th. But Alabama would get their revenge in the regular season finale, and overall Florida didn't end the season well, dropping 3 of their final 4 and losing to LSU in the conference tournament quarterfinals. However, even though they had limped to the finish, they still had a 21-10 record, and for the first time in program history, they got an invite to the big dance. And behind a game-high 28 points from Maxwell, the Gators would win their first tournament game versus NC State. Then 2 nights later, he would have another great showing with 24 points, while going 3 of 4 from deep in another win over Purdue, as the Gators had made it to the Sweet 16 to take on Syracuse. And for the 3rd straight game, Maxwell led the Gators in scoring, as he dropped 25 points. But a great performance from Ronnie Cycli would be too much for the Gators, as they almost came back from a halftime deficit, but fell short in the end, losing by 6 points, with Maxwell's junior season seeing him average about 21.5 points, 3.5 assists, and 2 steals per game. Even though the Gators had lost Moten and Lawrence to graduation, they would still begin the season as the number 14 ranked team in the nation. And while part of this was due to incoming freshman Livingston Chapman, it was mostly because of Shinsis, but even more because of Maxwell, as he would have his best all-around season, averaging over 20 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists, as well as almost 2 steals, while shooting nearly 40% from deep, as he would be a top 5 scorer in the conference for the 3rd straight season, while also finishing as a top 5 distributor, en route to another first-team All-SEC selection. Florida would start the year 4-0 with a big win over 18th-ranked Georgia Tech, as they would rank as high as 7th in the nation, but then they lost to unranked SMU, and over their next 8 would go just 5-3, while losing to both ranked opponents that they played in that time. After that, they would go on a 6-game win streak, which included a win over 4th-ranked Kentucky, yet would put up a 6-6 record in their final 12 games. However, Maxwell spent a portion of the season playing on a badly sprained ankle, while also suffering from torn tissue in his foot, but would still only miss 2 games. So he wasn't at 100% most of the year. But Florida still finished the regular season with a 21-10 record, and would go on to beat Tennessee in the conference tourney, before losing a close one to Georgia in the semis. But for the 2nd straight season, Florida would get a tournament bid. And while Maxwell was still scoring well, he was also doing a great job finding the open man throughout his tournament play, as a first-round matchup with St. John's would see him dish 6 assists. And while he did score 18 points, he shot just 5 of 15 from the field, yet the Gators still went to him for the clutch shot, as he made what ended up being the game-winning 3 in the final seconds, to push the Gators on to a 2nd-round matchup with Michigan. But even though Maxwell had an efficient 23 points and 10 assists, a 39-point performance from Glenn Rice propelled the Wolverines to an easy win, as Maxwell's senior year wrapped up with him averaging about 20 points, 4 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. So Maxwell would end his college career as the SEC's 2nd leading scorer, behind only Pete Maravich, and was one of college basketball's top combo guards, playing in one of its most competitive conferences. So based off on-court performance, Maxwell looked like a surefire first-round talent. However, for other reasons, Maxwell would fall to the 2nd round, as he was drafted by the Nuggets with the 47th pick, then immediately traded to the San Antonio Spurs, as reportedly the reasons for Maxwell's slip was due to him having minor run-ins with the law and having a reputation for partying, with some thinking that he should have distanced himself from where he grew up instead of staying home and attending Florida. But Maxwell would show as a rookie that he was much better than a late 2nd-round pick. The Spurs were a guard-heavy team with guys like Alvin Robertson and their 1st-round pick Willie Anderson. But a nerve injury to point guard Johnny Dawkins led to Maxwell getting a real opportunity this season, as on top of appearing in 79 games, he would start 36 of them and would put up great numbers during those starts. However, the Spurs hadn't been competitive in years and would have one of their worst seasons in franchise history this year, as they would finish with just a 21-61 record and miss the playoffs, with Maxwell's rookie year seeing him average about 11.5 points, 4 assists, and a steal per game. But leading up to the 1990 season, the Spurs had added some big pieces, and Maxwell had exhibited some surprising transparency. In September leading into the season, Maxwell would testify in front of a grand jury that he had received payments from Norm Sloan, among others, whenever he needed money at Florida, while being very honest about what he spent the money on, leading to Florida vacating the wins and tournament appearances during Maxwell's final 2 years. And while this didn't affect Maxwell too much, as he was already going into his 2nd NBA season, San Antonio Spurs management likely weren't too thrilled to hear about this, and with the team beginning a new era by welcoming rookies Sean Elliott and David Robinson, it was uncertain how Maxwell would fit into that. Maxwell was still a Spur to begin the season, but was getting less minutes while mostly coming off the bench, and overall just not being used as much in the offense, with David Robinson immediately becoming the franchise player, as Maxwell's numbers were way down. And San Antonio wanted to build a squeaky clean image, and having a guy like Maxwell who frequented the clubs made that difficult to do, with assistant coach Greg Popovich explicitly telling him to stay out of the clubs. But Maxwell did the complete opposite. Yet it turned out that the Spurs had a private investigator following him, and when news got back to the Spurs, Maxwell was as good as gone, and very soon after, his player rights had been sold to the Houston Rockets for $50,000. As Maxwell didn't even have to leave the state to join his new team. Maxwell joined a Rockets team featuring a great front court of star center Hakeem Olajuwon and power forward Otis Thorpe, with veteran point guard Sleepy Floyd running the offense. The Rockets were 23-29 at the time of the Maxwell acquisition, and although he would come off the bench upon his arrival, the quick and tenacious Maxwell gave Houston a lot of speed on both ends of the floor, and they knew they'd get maximum effort whenever he was on the court. And eventually, he would get his chance to start over the final 10 games of the season, as he upped his scoring to nearly 15 points per game. But more impressively, he was showing his ability as a facilitator, averaging nearly 7.5 assists. And in the 30 games with Maxwell, the Rockets went 18-12 to finish with a 41-41 record, which was enough for the final playoff spot in the West and a first-round matchup with Los Angeles. This series would see Maxwell begin to build his name as a player who loved the big moment, as he would score at least 20 points in each of the first 3 games of the series. But the Lakers' experience and great play from Magic and Worthy would lead to a 4-game series win, as Maxwell's overall season had ended with him averaging about 9 points, 3.5 assists, and 1 steal per game. But now Rockets fans had an idea of what kind of player Vernon Maxwell was, and he would give them everything he had for the next half-decade. Going into the 91 season, the team that would eventually become known as Clutch City was further coming together, as in late September, the Rockets had acquired point guard Kenny Smith, ushering in a new-look backcourt for years to come. And Maxwell would break out this season, really defining himself as a player. He would be one of 4 players on the team to average at least 17 points, and would get a lot of his points by way of the deep ball, as he would make and attempt then career highs, with his 172 made threes being the highest mark in the league, as he would have some incredible scoring outputs this season, such as a 45-point, 9-rebound, and 7-assist performance with 8 made threes in an April 5th defeat of Denver. And a couple months earlier, he had gone for a career-high 51 points, while going 19 of 22 from the free throw line in a win over Cleveland, with him dropping 30 of his 51 points in the opening quarter. And Maxwell would also see the increase in his numbers out of necessity, as Olajuwon would suffer an eye injury mid-season, which kept him out for nearly 2 months. And in that time, Maxwell averaged nearly 20 points a game. And the Rockets went 15-10 in that time, as they were 32-23 when Olajuwon came back, then almost immediately went on a 13-game win streak, as they would end the year at 52-30 and get a first-round rematch with LA. However, this series went even worse than last season, as although Maxwell was the Rockets' second leading scorer, he averaged 12.5 points on 33% shooting in games 1 and 3, but had a 31-point outburst in game 2. Yet the Rockets lost all 3 to end their season, as Maxwell's year ended with him averaging about 17 points, 3.5 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. Maxwell would have a career year in 1992, as he finished as the team's 3rd leading scorer on a career-high 17.2 points per game, while averaging at least 4 assists per game for the first time in his career. He would hit double figures in 68 games, while recording 3 games with at least 30, once again draining the most 3-pointers in the NBA this season. And as his streaky yet impressive scoring barrages became more common, it became part of the reason why Maxwell would earn the nickname Mad Max. But as Maxwell would say, the nickname was more so due to him being a player who didn't take anything from anyone. And while you want fearless players, you really started to see Maxwell's temper get the best of him, as he would be fined for bumping an official and throwing things at him during a game against Chicago, with those games being a prime example of Maxwell showing no fear, as although it didn't often go well, he would go right at the Bulls' Michael Jordan any chance he got. Houston got a much healthier season from Olajuwon, but after 52 games, they were sitting at just 26-26, when the Rockets would move on from coach Don Chaney and replace him with assistant coach and franchise legend Rudy Tomjanovich. And as Maxwell would say in a later interview,
he let me be the player I want to be. A lot of coaches would have got rid of me a long time ago. He told me he had my back 110%.
And while the coaching change did lead to more winning than losing, it was marginal, as the Rockets went 16-14 the rest of the way to finish at 42-40, and disappointingly missed the playoffs, with Maxwell's year ending with him averaging about 17 points, 4 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. But the 1993 season would be the year that the Rockets started hearing their name being mentioned among the league's elite. The '92 draft had seen the Rockets add Alabama forward Robert Horry, whose length and mobility would help Houston boast one of the best defenses in the league, as they had the size and quickness to rotate and switch without sacrificing effectiveness. And although Maxwell was slightly undersized at the 2-guard, he was stronger than he looked and had no problem playing physical defense, as he would see himself ejected and fined for an early season flagrant foul. Maxwell would see his efficiency drop slightly and his scoring drop dramatically, as Tomjanovich made sure that the offense ran through Olajuwon. Yet even though Maxwell averaged over 3.5 points less, he was the Robin to Olajuwon's Batman, as the team's second leading scorer and a great kickout man when Olajuwon was doubled, and he would also finish second on the team in assists and steals. Maxwell would hit double figures in 51 games while recording 2 double-doubles on the year, but his shot selection continued to be the main thing holding him back, as although he could be lights out one game, he could then go ice cold over the next 2 or 3. And even though he had no problem giving the ball up as an above-average passer, if his shot wasn't falling, his solution was usually to shoot his way out of it. And although he shot just 40.7% this season, this would be the final season of his career shooting at least 40%. But with the Rockets now boasting a top 3 defense in the league, they finished with their best record in years, at 55-27, and made a return to the playoffs with a first-round matchup with the Clippers. Yet Maxwell had suffered a broken wrist late in the season, as the Rockets would be without his services for most of the series. He would return in Game 4 with the Rockets holding a 2-1 lead, but would play sparingly as the Clippers tied it. But he would get 32 minutes off the bench in the series-deciding Game 5, and would give the team 13 points, as they won by 4 to advance to a second-round matchup with Seattle. As had become the usual with Maxwell, he was streaky in the series, starting with an 18-point Game 1, then following that up with an efficient 25 points and 9 assists in Game 2. Yet the Rockets lost both, and would go back to Houston down 2-0. Game 3 saw Maxwell go for just 9 points on 3 of 11 shooting, but he came back with 18 points on 8 of 14 shooting in Game 4, as Houston had evened the series. Maxwell went ice cold in Game 5 with 6 points in a blowout loss, but would come back with an efficient 15 2 nights later, as Houston forced a Game 7, and Game 7 would go down to the wire, and Maxwell had been playing well, with 19 points and 6 assists on 7 of 14 shooting, but in the final seconds of overtime, he wouldn't be able to get his 15th shot to fall.
Maxwell.
As Maxwell would have put the Rockets ahead with seconds left if he could have converted, but Seattle would hold on to advance, with Maxwell's season ending with him averaging about 14 points, 4 assists, and a steal per game. Going into the '94 season, the Rockets had added another guard through the draft in Florida State's Sam Cassell, and while Maxwell could have looked at this as someone trying to take his spot, Cassell would say that Maxwell took him under his wing and gave him his toughness. The Rockets played the same in '94, with the offense running through Olajuwon and the defense being anchored by Olajuwon, as he would take home both MVP and DPOY this year. Maxwell put up similar scoring numbers as the team's third leading scorer, but it came on a lot of shots, as he would shoot below 39% from the field and below 30% from deep. But as he was always looking to contribute to winning in any way he could, he turned in the best passing season of his career, leading the team with 5.1 assists per game. And defensively, he would lead the team with 1.7 steals per game. The Rockets were unstoppable to begin the season, winning their first 15 out of the gate, and after 23 games they were 22-1, and Maxwell had been quite efficient in this time, especially from deep. But as the season wore on, his shot wasn't falling as much, but he would still hit double figures in 49 games, including 2 with at least 30, and 3 games with at least 10 assists. But Maxwell was also playing this season with a heavy heart, as prior to the year, he and his wife lost their daughter shortly after she was born. So although Maxwell wasn't playing great, he was still showing up for a Rockets team who cruised through the regular season with the league's second best record at 58-24, leading to a first-round matchup with Portland. But the Rockets wouldn't cruise through the postseason like they did the regular season. Maxwell came out firing in Game 1, finishing with 24 points on 64% shooting, while scoring 10 straight in the fourth quarter at one point. Then he would come back with an efficient 17 in Game 2, as the Rockets were heading back to Portland with a 2-game lead. He would have 19 in Game 3, but would shoot just 5 of 14 from the field, as the Rockets lost by 3. Then even though Maxwell had just 7 points in Game 4, he added 8 rebounds and 4 steals, as the Rockets wrapped up the series and moved on to a second-round matchup with Phoenix. Maxwell couldn't find his shot in Game 1, going 1 for 9 from the field for 3 points before fouling out. However, he still made his mark with 9 rebounds and 8 assists. Yet the Rockets blew a fourth-quarter lead and fell behind in the series. Game 2 saw Maxwell come back with 15 points and 9 assists, yet go 2 of 9 from beyond the arc. And this time, the Rockets would blow a 20-point fourth-quarter lead, eventually losing in overtime, as they were down 2-0, leading to the Houston Chronicle dubbing them Choke City. But the man they called Mad Max came up clutch in Game 3, although it didn't start that way, as he had just 3 points in the first half, as Houston went into halftime with an 8-point deficit. But then Maxwell dropped 31 points in the second half, as the Rockets outscored the Suns by 24 points over the final 2 quarters to get their first win. But after his Game 3 dominance, Maxwell came back with 7 points on 3 of 13 shooting in Game 4, yet the Rockets still evened the series. Then after a 12-point Game 5, the Rockets had flipped the script, heading back to Phoenix up 3-2. But Maxwell would go 2 for 10 from the field and let his frustrations boil over, as he would eventually be ejected as the Rockets failed to close out the series. And Game 7 would end the same way for Maxwell, as Maxwell would take offense to a hard foul on Olajuwon by Barkley, leading to another ejection. But at the time of the foul, the game was already out of reach, and the Rockets would get the win, as they would escape to a conference finals matchup with Utah. Maxwell's struggles continued in the conference finals, as although he hit double figures in 3 of his first 4 games, he was shooting just 32% from the field. Yet he was still a threat from deep, as after 4 games, he had made 11 of his 27 attempts from beyond the arc. And even with his struggles, the Rockets had jumped to a commanding 3-1 lead. Then with a chance to punch their ticket to the finals, Maxwell came out on fire in Game 5, draining 4 3-pointers in the first quarter alone. And although he hit just 3 more shots the rest of the game, Houston's first quarter push was enough to get them the win and a trip to the NBA Finals. While this series was the battle of centers in Hakeem Olajuwon and Patrick Ewing, it also brought Maxwell's Eastern Conference parallel in John Starks, as the two would have a good battle, with both hitting some big shots, yet missing a lot of shots. Maxwell started with just 11 points on 4 of 16 shooting in Game 1, as the Rockets were still able to pull out the win. Then even though Maxwell had 20 points in Game 2, the Knicks would even the series. Houston would regain the advantage with a Game 3 win in New York, as Maxwell finished with 12 points, yet would shoot just 5 of 15. He would have another 12-point outing in Game 4, but this time it would end in defeat. Then after an 8-point performance in Game 5, the Rockets found themselves down 3-2, heading back to Houston. And then Game 6 would see Starks play one of the best games of his career. But a last-second Olajuwon block would save Houston's season, as it was now winner-take-all going into Game 7. And Maxwell would pick the best time to have his best game, as he would drop 21 points on 6 of 11 shooting, while adding 4 assists with 0 turnovers. But it was what he did in the closing minutes of the game that would immortalize him in Houston.
Olajuwon changed his mind. Maxwell for 3. Vernon Maxwell.
With the Rockets holding on to an 80-75 lead with less than 2 minutes left, Olajuwon found Maxwell for a three-pointer, which gave the Rockets an 8-point lead and helped ice the game, as Maxwell and the Rockets were NBA champions. With Maxwell's season ending with him averaging about 13.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. But the 1995 season would become infamous for Mad Max. The Rockets looked primed for a repeat in '95 as they would win their first 9, with Maxwell filling his usual role of a complimentary scorer and long-range specialist, as he would attempt a career-high 6.9 threes per game this year. And although the Rockets couldn't keep up their undefeated pace, they were still sitting at 28-15 going into a February 6th matchup with the Portland Trail Blazers. But this would be a turning point for the worst in Maxwell's career. In the final minutes of the third quarter during a blowout loss for Houston, Maxwell went into the stands in Portland and smacked a fan who was heckling him, leading to a 10-game suspension and $20,000 fine. However, Maxwell has remained adamant that the reason for this was due to the fan making remarks about the daughter he and his wife had lost before last season, with both parties eventually filing lawsuits and ultimately settling out of court. But now the Rockets were without their starting two-guard at a time where they couldn't afford to lose any ground. So about a week after the incident, they would make a huge move in acquiring longtime Portland Trail Blazers star Clyde Drexler. And when Maxwell returned, he would see himself slowly lose his starting role, while his numbers also took a big hit. And with the Rockets trying to gel after the Drexler trade, they only managed a 19-21 record after the incident, finishing as the 6th seed in the West at 47-35, and getting a first-round matchup with Utah. But Maxwell would only see about 16 minutes off the bench in Game 1, and even though Tomjanovich drew up a play to give him the opportunity to tie or win the game for Houston in the final seconds, Maxwell felt disrespected after having sat for so much of the game, and after missing a three-pointer that would have gave Houston the win, Maxwell stormed off the court. And then after missing the team's practices and Game 2, it was announced that Maxwell would be put on an indefinite leave of absence and miss the rest of the playoffs, as the Rockets would continue on to beat Utah in 5 games, then would defeat the Suns in another 7-game conference semifinals, before Olajuwon dominated the conference finals versus the San Antonio Spurs and league MVP David Robinson. Then the Rockets' championship pedigree would shine through versus a young Orlando Magic team, as they swept the finals to repeat as champions, as technically Maxwell was again a champion, even though it didn't feel like it, with Maxwell's regular season ending with him averaging about 13.5 points, 4.5 assists, and a steal per game. But Game 1 versus Utah would be the last time Vernon Maxwell was seen in a Rockets uniform. Before getting to the next chapter in Maxwell's career, it is worth mentioning that he would say on the Sheed and Tyler podcast that a big reason for him quitting the team was because he felt mistreated by the organization. He would say he and Drexler had no bad blood, and he would have been open for a role change had the Rockets talked to him about it. Yet instead he would say that during his suspension, no one reached out to see how he was doing or to give him a heads up on the Drexler trade, as he felt like the Rockets at least owed him that. Yet he still says his decision to walk away from the team was one of the worst decisions he ever made. But instead of returning to the Rockets, soon after their finals win, they would waive Maxwell, marking a messy end to what was once a great relationship. Maxwell would sign with the Philadelphia 76ers, even though he reportedly had better offers from both Charlotte and Indiana, as he would say that he wanted to play for head coach John Lucas before his career was over. But Maxwell's redemption year didn't get off to the best start, as in August he was arrested and charged for marijuana possession. But if there was one coach who wouldn't change their opinion on Maxwell, it was Lucas. But one thing he would change was Maxwell's primary position, as he would opt to play him at point guard for the '96 season. Philly had some young talent in forward Clarence Weatherspoon and rookie swingman Jerry Stackhouse, and would also acquire Derek Coleman, yet he would only appear in 11 games for the team. Maxwell would have his best individual season in years, finishing as the team's third leading scorer on his highest scoring average in 5 years, while leading the team in assists, as he would record 56 games in double figures, including a 41-point outing in an April 8th defeat of New Jersey. And he would also record a career-high 6 double-doubles, which included a career-high 14 assists to go along with 18 points in a season-opening win versus Washington. Yet these 2 wins were rare occurrences for Philly, as the Sixers had been a cellar dweller since Charles Barkley left years earlier, with this season being rock bottom, as they featured a bottom 5 offense and defense, finishing with the second worst record in the league at 18-64, as Maxwell's year had seen him average about 16 points, 4.5 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. But with the Sixers drafting Allen Iverson over the summer, they no longer had a need for the soon-to-be 31-year-old Maxwell, as they released him in mid-July. In late August, Maxwell returned to where it all began, signing on with the San Antonio Spurs. And while it initially looked like he was back in a winning situation, the injury bug had other ideas, as Sean Elliott would miss over half the season, and superstar big man David Robinson appeared in just 6 games, as the Spurs' top player this season was a 37-year-old Dominique Wilkins. So Maxwell would get what may have been a bigger role than expected, appearing in 72 games while starting 31 of them, and averaging double-figure scoring. And while it wouldn't be a perfect season for Maxwell, he would hit a significant milestone, as he would become the 4th player in NBA history to make 1,000 three-pointers. But after 18 wins with the Sixers last year, Maxwell would experience 20 wins with the Spurs this year, as they finished at 20-62, with Maxwell's season ending with him averaging about 13 points, 2 assists, and a steal per game. But the 1998 season and subsequent summer would be one to forget for Maxwell. Maxwell would again find himself in a new situation, as San Antonio would release him shortly after the season, and he would be without a team until January, when he would sign a couple 10-day deals with Orlando, appearing in 11 games for the team, before signing on with Charlotte for the rest of the season in February. Yet he would appear in just 31 regular season games before he surrendered himself to authorities in mid-April, due to his aforementioned 1995 marijuana possession conviction, when officers found a gram of weed in his car, and Maxwell had exhausted all of his appeals, so he would spend the next 3 months in jail, as Maxwell's season had ended with him averaging about 7 points, 1 assist, and half a steal per game. Then soon after serving his time, Maxwell would file for bankruptcy in late August. And while it had been a tumultuous year for Maxwell, he would still find a temporary home in Sacramento, shortly before the beginning of the lockout-shortened 99 season. It was a new era in Sacramento, with the additions of Chris Webber and Vlade Divac, with Maxwell joining another Florida alum in rookie Jason Williams. And Maxwell would be an important rotational piece this season, giving the Kings experience and attitude on their second unit, hitting double figures in 25 games, and even going for 33 points in a March 30th defeat of Utah, which would be some foreshadowing for a Kings team who would finish the year at 27-23 and get a first-round matchup with the Jazz. Even after a few years without the postseason, Maxwell was his streaky self upon his return, as over his first 3 games he was averaging 7 points on a combined 7 of 31 shooting. But the Kings were up 2-1. He would trend in the right direction with a 13-point performance in a Game 4 loss, but would eke in the series-deciding Game 5, as he turned in 22 points on 8 of 15 shooting, and overall hit some big shots over the final 2 games. Yet the Kings would fall in Game 5 to lose the series, as Maxwell's year ended with him averaging about 10.5 points, 1.5 assists, and half a steal per game. The Kings released Maxwell after the season, but less than a week later, he signed on with Seattle, as he was joining a Sonics team led by another outspoken, in-your-face guard in Gary Payton, with these two already having had their scuffles during Maxwell's time in Houston. But the two were able to coexist for most of the season, as the veteran Maxwell again carved out a role for himself. However, he would undergo knee surgery in early January, and when he did return in mid-March, he wasn't able to produce the same way, with the headline of his year being a late March fight in practice between him and Payton, as reportedly, Maxwell didn't appreciate the way Payton was beating up on second-year guard Shamond Williams, which eventually escalated into a fight between the two veteran guards, with Payton throwing a chair and Maxwell using a weight as a weapon. And when Horace Grant tried to break up the fight, Maxwell accidentally hit him with the weight, leading to Grant missing 2 weeks with a shoulder injury, for a Sonics team who finished at 45-37 and got a first-round matchup with Utah. But Maxwell wouldn't be a part of this series, as his knee soreness would keep him sidelined and the Sonics would lose in 5, with Maxwell's year ending with him averaging about 11 points, 1.5 assists, and a steal per game. Shortly before the start of the 2001 season, Maxwell was included in a trade that saw him end up in New York, yet he would be waived almost immediately. A few weeks later, he would sign on with Philadelphia as a fill-in for the injured Speedy Claxton, but was waived less than 2 months later. Then about 2 months after that, he would sign with Dallas for the remainder of the season, playing a minimal role for a Mavs team who finished with a 53-29 record and would defeat Utah in the playoffs before losing to San Antonio, as Maxwell would only see the court in 4 of the Mavs' 10 playoff games, and would end his season with averages of about 1 point, 1.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. And this would mark the end of a roller coaster ride of a career for Vernon Maxwell. Unfortunately, he would again find himself in jail a few years after his retirement due to multiple charges. But in more recent years, he has reconciled with the Houston Rockets organization and has also become a mental health advocate, while acknowledging his own struggles with mental health during and after his playing career. And he has even began making appearances on a variety of NBA podcasts, looking happy and healthy. Vernon Maxwell is one of the most polarizing players to ever put on an NBA uniform, but his unfortunate reputation as an unpredictable hothead seems to overshadow his years as a great NBA player. And that's not to say there aren't a ton of fans who appreciate him, it's just that as time goes on, you hear more about his mistakes and crazy stories than his on-court play. And while he was one of a kind, he still deserves to be recognized for what he did for his team on the basketball court, as he could go off at any point, as a legitimate deep-range threat at a time when they were much more rare than they are today. And on top of that was an above-average passer and a physical defender. And as is very clear, he didn't fear anyone. And even though it didn't end in the most amicable way, you can't tell the story of the 90s Houston Rockets without mentioning Mad Max. And while he was one of the streakiest players one could think of, he had more than one way to impact a game, with his biggest weakness being himself. As when he could keep himself focused, he was dangerous. But you don't get the nickname Mad Max for being even-keeled. And love him or hate him, you had to respect Vernon Maxwell. But that's it for today's episode on Vernon Maxwell. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on his Eastern Conference counterpart, or this one on his teammate in Sacramento. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.